Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is Discerning What is True. We're going to try to read chapter 4 tonight with Murder by Injection by Eustace Mullins. This book was written back in the late 80s, and the title of the chapter is called Vaccination. And we've already dealt with the medical monopoly in chapter 1, chapter 2, quacks on quackery, and in 3, chapter 3 was the prophets of cancer. And now we're going into vaccination again. And I'm live on Facebook tonight. I'm actually also live on YouTube and also on Odyssey. Hope everyone's had a good day and appreciate you guys being here. And again, if you have questions, whatever, and you're more than welcome to spread this information to others because these books are really hard to get. They're not something you just pick up at a store, especially anywhere, because there's only a limited publication of these books that have been in the past, and many people are always seeking these particular books. You see, so let's get into the book here, the chapter here. Thank you again for being here. Um, we'll see how this goes. And so let me do one more thing here. We'll get this thing done the right way. So we can make it easier for me to read here. Okay. Okay. Um, One of the few doctors who had dared to speak out against the medical monopoly was Dr. Robert S. Mendelsohn, spelled Mendelsohn, dramatized his stand against modern medicine by defining it as a church which has four holy waters. The first of these is listed as vaccinations. Dr. Mendelsohn termed vaccinations of questionable safety. However, other doctors had been more explicit. It is notable that the Rockefeller interests had fought throughout the 19th century to make these four holy waters compulsory throughout the United States, ignoring all the protests and warnings of their dangers. Of these four terms, or four items, which might well be termed the four horsemen of the apocalypse, because they too are known to bring death and destruction in their wake. The most perilous in its long-term effects may well be the practice of immunization. This practice goes directly against the discovery of modern holistic medical experts that the body has a natural immune defense against illness. What he means simply is that your body is capable of fighting off certain illnesses as long as you eat the right kind of foods and take care of yourself. We have simply gone away from that. We stray from that, and we try to get what I call a protective system, what we call taking vaccines. In reality, it actually is from man, and again, it cannot duplicate what nature can do. You see. The Church of Modern Medicine claims that we can only be absolved from the perils of infection by the holy waters of vaccination, injecting into a system a foreign body of infection, which will then perform a medical miracle, you see, and will confer lifelong immunity, hence the term immunization. The greatest heresy any physician can commit is to voice publicly any doubt of any one of the four holy waters. But the most deeply entrenched in a modern medical practice is undoubtedly the numerous vaccination programs. They are also the most consistent practical operations of the medical monopoly. Yet one physician, Dr. Harry R. Bybee of Norfolk, Virginia, has publicly stated, "My honest opinion is that vaccines is the cause of more diseases and suffering than anything I could name. I believe such diseases as cancer, syphilis, cold sores, and many other disease conditions are the direct results of vaccination. Yet in the state of Virginia and in many, many other states, parents are compelled to submit their children to this procedure while the medical professions not only receives its pay for the service, but also makes splendid and prospective patients for the future, you see. The present writer well remembered the 1920s as a child in Virginia, going to school for some weeks without having submitted to the compulsory vaccination ordered by the state authorities. Each morning, the teacher would begin the day class by asking, "Clarence, did you bring your vaccination certification today?" Obviously, this was the most urgent business of the educational system, that is, taking priority over such matters as lessons and studying. Each morning I have to say, no, I didn't bring it today. The other children would turn and stare at this dangerous classmate who might infect them all with some terrible disease. Unbelievable. This is using fear. Unbelievable. My mother had been a registered nurse, and she never urged me to go ahead with any vacation with my vaccination. I suspect she knew more than the doctors about its possible effects. After postponing the dreaded ordeal for some weeks, I was finally led to the doctor like an animal being led up to the plank to be stunned, and I received my injection. Of course, it made me extremely ill as my body fought the infection, but the class was delivered from Pearl, and I was accepted as a duly branded member of society. In The Curse of Canaan, which is another book that Mr. Eustace Mullins has written, I wrote of the deliverance of our children up a ritual sacrifice, a practice which seemingly ended with the destruction of Baal cult some 5,000 years ago. Unfortunately, the cult of Baal seems to be firmly entrenched in the present establishment, which is often known by its sobriety as known as the Brotherhood of Death. It is disturbing to see how the educators that is eagerly embrace each new offense against children in our schools, railing against any mention of morality or religion, while solemnly indoctrinating 6-year-olds in the advantages of an alternate lifestyle and their sexual preferences. The present goal of the National Education Association seems to be that teachers should hand out condoms to the class before beginning each day's activities. Yeah, this is all a social. It's not anything to do with education. It's just brainwashing. The urgency of my vaccination was not that there was any epidemic then raging in the city of Roanoke, nor had there been one in the ensuing 60 years. The urgency was that no child shall be spared the ministrations of the cult of Baal, or forego sacrifice of the altar of the child molesters. The medical monopoly cannot afford to have a single pupil escape the monetary offerings to be paid for the compulsory vaccination, the tribute of the enslaved to the masters. From London comes an alarming observation from a practitioner of excellent reputation and long experience, Dr. Herbert Snow, senior surgeon at the Cancer Hospital of London, voiced his concern. In recent years, many men and women in the prime of life have dropped dead suddenly, often after attending a feast or a banquet. I am convinced that some 80% of these deaths are caused by inculcation, or vaccination that had undergone. They are well known to cause grave and permanent disease to the heart. The courier always hushes it up as a natural cause. You cannot find any such warning in any medical textbook or popular book on health. In fact, the writer was able to locate it in a small volume buried deep in the stacks of the Library of Congress. Yet such ominous observations from established medical practitioners should be as widely circulated as possible, if only to be attacked by those who can refute the premises. At least it cannot be attacked by the establishment as quackery, because Dr. Snow is not attempting to sell some substitute for vaccination, but merely warning of its dangers. Another practitioner, Dr. W.B. Clark of Indiana, finds that cancer was practically unknown until compulsory vaccination with cowpox vaccine began to be introduced. I've had to deal with at least 200 cases of cancer, and I never saw a case of cancer in an unvaccinated person. You hear that? At last, we had the breakthrough for which the American Cancer Society has been searching. At such great expense and for so many years, Dr. Clark has never seen a case of cancer in an unvaccinated person. Is not this a lead which should be explored? With such impetus, the ACS could once again get the telephone banks ringing the fundraising drives to initial positive research as to the possible connection between vaccination and incidence of cancer. Somehow, we suspect that the ACS will not follow this lead. It would also look well as etched in stone above the imposing interest in the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. I never saw a case of cancer in an unvaccinated person. However, it is unlikely that the high priests of modern medicine will be able to give up one of their 4 commandments. It will be necessary for the outraged public to bring pressure to bear to abandon the modern ritual of sacrificing our children to Baal in a 5,000-year-old ritual called, in its modern version, compulsory immunization. In the land where freedom rings, or we think it does, or it's supposed to ring, and even more surprising to find that every citizen is compelled to submit to a compulsory vaccination ritual. Here again, we are speaking of a civilization which is now being visited by two plagues, the plague of cancer and the plague of AIDS. Yet compulsory vaccination offers no protection against the plagues, which threatens us. It is goodbye whooping cough, goodbye diphtheria, and hello AIDS. The medical monopoly is searching desperately for some type of immunization against these plagues, and no doubt will eventually come up with some type of vaccine, which will be more dreadful than the disease. From the outset, our most distinguished medical experts have proudly informed us that AIDS is incurable, which is hardly the approach we expect from those who demand that we accept their infallibility in all things to do with medicine. Another well-known medical practitioner, Dr. J.M. Peoples, P-E-B-B-L-E-S, of San Francisco, had written a book on vaccines in which he says, vaccination practice, pushed to the front of all occasions by the medical profession through political connivance, made compulsory by the state, has not only become the chief menace and the greatest danger to the health of the rising generations, but likewise the growing outrage upon the personal liberties of the American citizen. Compulsory vaccination poisoned the crimson currents of the human system with brute, abstract limp under the strange infatuation that it would prevent smallpox was one of the darkest blots that disfigured the last century. Dr. Peoples refers to the fact that cowpox vaccine was one of the most peculiar inventions or discoveries of the Age of Enlightenment. However, as I have pointed out in The Curse of Canaan, the Age of Enlightenment was merely the latest program of the cult of Baal and its rituals of child sacrifice, which in one guise or another has now been with us for some 5,000 years. Because of this goal, the medical monopoly is also known as the Society for Crippling Children. Perhaps the most telling comment of Dr. Peoples' criticism is his reference to the brute abstract limp. Could there be some connection between the injection of this substance and the spread of the hitherto unknown form of cancer, cancer of the lymph glands? This type of cancer is not only one of the most commonly encountered versions of this disease, it's also one of the most difficult to treat because it rapidly spreads throughout the entire system. A diagnosis of cancer of the lymph glands now means a virtual death sentence. Yes, indeed. The lymph glands are your protection, folks. If we suppose that physicians such as Dr. Snow and Dr. Peoples are trumpeting non-existent dangers when they write of vaccinations, we have only to look at the court records of many cases around the country. Wyke Laboratories was the defendant in a case in which a Wichita, Kansas jury recently awarded $15 million in damage to an 8-year-old girl. She incurred permanent brain damage after receiving a diphtheria pertussis tetanus vaccine. Michelle Graham received the immunization at the age of 3 months and incurred severe brain damage, which left her permanently incapacitated. Her lawyers proved that the damage was solely attributed to the vaccine, although Wyke lawyers, that's spelled W-Y-E-T-H, lawyers attempt to deny this. Because of the financial prospects, physicians are demanding earlier vaccinations for children each year. Of course they are. The Vaccinations Committee of the American Academy of Pediatricians recently demanded that the age for children to receive flu vaccines be lowered from the previous 24 months to 18 months. They're promoting a new version of flu vaccine, which was said to have been tested on children in Finland. Yeah, I wonder about that. In an article in Science, March 4th, 1977, Jonas and Daryl Salk, S-A-L-K, warned that live virus vaccines against influenza or polymyalgia may in each instance produce the disease intended to prevent. The live virus against measles and mumps may produce such side effects as encephalitis, that is brain damage. I'll spell that for you. E-N-C-E-P-H-A-L-I-T-I-S, brain damage. If vaccines present such a clear and present danger to children who are forced to submit to them, we must examine the forces which demand that they submit. In the United States, vaccines are actively and incessantly promoted as the solution for all infectious diseases. by such government agencies as the Center for Disease Control in Georgia, by the HEW, by the USPHS, by the FDA, by the AMA, and the WHO. It is a more than passing interest that the federal agencies should be so passionate supporters of compulsory use of vaccines, and that they also should go through the revolving door to the big drug firms whose products they have so insidiously promoted through the years of service to the public. It is these federal agents who have drafted the procedures which force the states to enact compulsory vaccination legislation, which has been drafted by the attorneys for the medical monopoly to become the law of the land. In the dim reaches of the past, when Americans were more protected of their now vanishing freedoms, there was sporadic opposition to a threatening outrage which a dictatorial central government sought to impose on every child in the United States. In 1909, the Senate of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts introduced Bill number 8, an act to prohibit compulsory vaccine, Section 1. It shall be unlawful for any board of education, board of health, or any public board acting in this state under political regulations or otherwise to compel by resolution, order, or proceeding of any kind vaccination of any child or person of any age by making vaccination a conditioned procedure to the attending of any public or private schools, either as a pupil or as a teacher. No doubt this legislation was drafted by a physician who was well aware of the dangers of vaccinations. Even in 1909, the medical monopoly was strong enough to bury this bill. It was never submitted for vote. However, the peril of even one state legislature folding their criminal conspiracy caused the Rockefeller Syndicate to concentrate on perfecting an instrument for controlling each and every state legislature in the United States. This was achieved by setting up the councils of state government in Chicago. It's routinely issued to every its cases are routinely issued to every state legislature, and such is in totalitarian control that not one legislature has ever failed to follow its dictates. Its dictates, folks. It says one legislator, you see. So it's not a legislator. Yeah, I guess it is. Okay. Edward Jenner, that is from 1796 to 1839, discovered that cowpox vaccine was supposedly inoculate persons against the 18th century scourge of smallpox. In fact, smallpox was already on the wane, and some authorities believed it would have vanished by the end of the century. Due to a number of contributing factors, after the use of cowpox vaccine became widespread in England, a smallpox epidemic broke out, which killed 23,081 people. Smallpox epidemics became worse each year that the vaccine was used. You see, in 1872, it was 44,480 people were killed by it. England finally banned the vaccine in 1948, despite the fact that it was one of the most widely heralded contributions which that country had made to modern medicine. This action came after many years of compulsory vaccinations, during which period those who refused to submit to its dangers were hurried off to jail. Japan initially compulsory vaccines in 1872. In 1892, there were 165,000, almost 166,000 cases of smallpox there, which resulted in 29,000, almost 30,000 people dead. Japan still enforces compulsory vaccination. However, since it is a military-occupied nation, the present government can hardly be blamed for sustaining to the Rockefeller medical monopoly. Germany also instilled compulsory vaccinations. In 1939, during the Nazi regime, diphtheria rate increased astronomically to 150,000 cases. Norway, which never instituted compulsory vaccination, had only 50 cases during the same period. Can we learn something from this, folks? Can we? It produces what it poses to. It poses to actually going to cure. It doesn't. It does the opposite. Polio has increased 700,000% in states which have compulsory vaccinations. The much quoted writer on medical problems, Morris Beale, B-E-A-L-E, who for years edited the informative publication Capsule News Digest from Capitol Hill, offered a standing reward during the years from 1954 to 1960, of $30,000, which he would pay to anyone who could prove that the polio vaccine was not a killer and a fraud. There were no takers. Medical historians have finally come to the reluctant conclusion that the great flu epidemics of 1918 was solely attributed to the widespread use of vaccines. It was the first war in which vaccination was compulsory for all servicemen. The Boston Herald reported that 47 soldiers had been killed by vaccination in 1 month. As a result, the military hospitals were filled not with wounded combatant casualties, but with casualties of the vaccine. The epidemic was called the Spanish influenza, a deliberately misleading appellation which was intended to conceal its origins. This flu epidemic claimed 20 million victims. Those who survived it were the ones who had refused the vaccine. In recent years, annual recurring epidemics of flu are called the Russian flu. For some reason, the Russians never protested, perhaps because the Rockefellers made regular trips to Moscow to lay down the party line. The perils of vaccinations were already known. That is, Plain Talk magazine notes that during the Franco-Prussian War, every German soldier was vaccinated. The result was that 53,288 otherwise healthy men developed smallpox. The death rate was high. In what is now known as the Great Swine Flu Massacre, the President of the United States, Gerald Ford, was enlisted to persuade the public to undergo a national vaccination campaign. The moving force behind the scheme was a 135 million windfall profit for the major drug manufacturers. It's all about them making money, folks. It ain't about your child. It ain't. They had a swine flu vaccine which specifically pig raisers had refused to touch, fearful it might wipe out their crop. Yeah, the manufacturers had only tried to get $80 million from the swine breeders, you see. Balked in this sale, they turned to the other market, that is, the humans. The impetus for the national swine flu vaccine came directly from the same place, from the Disease Control Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Perhaps coincidentally, Jimmy Carter, a member of the Trilateral Commission, was then planning his presidential campaign in Georgia. The incumbent president, Gerald Ford, had all the advantages of a massive bureaucracy to aid him in his election campaign, while the ineffective and little-known Jimmy Carter offered no serious threat in the election. Suddenly, out of Atlanta came the Center for Disease Control Plan for National Immunization Campaign against swine flu. The fact that there was not a single known case of this flu in the United States did not deter the medical monopoly from their scheme. The swine breeders had been shocked by the demonstrations of the vaccine on a few pigs, which had collapsed and died. One can imagine the anxious conference in the headquarters of the great drug firms until one bright young man remarked, "Well, if the swine breeders want to inject it in their animals, our own other market is to inject it into people." The Ford-sponsored swine flu campaign almost died on early death when a conscientious public servant, Dr. Anthony Morris, formerly of the HEW and then active as director of the Virus Bureau at the Food and Drug Administration, declared that there could be no authentic swine flu vaccine because there has never been any case of swine flu on which they could test it. Yes, someone with a brain. Dr. Morris then went public with a statement that at no point were the swine flu vaccines effective. He was promptly fired, but the damage had been done. The damage controls consisted of that great humanitarian Walter Cronkite and the President of the United States, you see, combining their forces to come to the rescue of the medical monopoly. Walter Cronkite had President Ford appear on his news program to urge the American people to submit to the inoculations with the swine flu vaccine. CBS then and later could never find any reason to air any analysis or scientific critique of the swine flu vaccine, which was identified as containing many toxic poisons, including alien viral protein particles, formaldehyde, residents of chicken and egg imbibible substances, sucrose, thimerosal, a derivative of poisonous mercury, polysorbate, and some other 80 other substances. Meanwhile, back at the virus laboratories, after Dr. Anthony Morris had been summarily fired, a special team of workers was rushed in to clean out the 4 rooms in which he had conducted his scientific tests. The laboratory was filled with animals whose records verify his claims, representing some 3 years of constant research. All the animals were immediately destroyed. Same thing to do when they blow up a building. Same thing they did at the Georgia Guidestones. They destroyed all. And Morris records were burned. They did not even go so far as to sow salt throughout the area because they believed their job was done. You see. So his records were burned, folks. A man who fought the system did his best, spent 3 years of his life to prevent this. And guess what? They burned his records. My, oh my. Do we have a guilty group of people, don't we? On April 15, 1976, Congress passed the Public Law 94266, which provided $135 million of taxpayers' funds to pay for a national swine flu inoculation campaign. HCW was to distribute the vaccine to state and local health agencies on a national basis for inoculation at no charge. The insurance agency then went public with their warning that they would not insure drug firms against possible suits from the results of swine flu inoculation, because no studies had been carried out which could predict its efforts. It was to fold the insurance companies that CBS had Gerald Ford made his impassioned appeal to 215 million people, that is Americans, to save themselves while there was still time and to rush down to the friendly local health department and get the swine flu vaccination at absolutely no charge. This may have been CBS's finest hour in its distinguished career of public service. It's a joke, folks. Hardly had the swine flu campaign been completed than the reports of the casualty began to pour in. Within a few months, claims totaling $1.3 billion had been filed by victims who had suffered paralytic from the swine flu vaccine. The medical authorities proved equal to the challenge. They leaped to the defense of the medical monopoly by labeling the new epidemic as Guillain-Barré syndrome. There has since been increasing speculation that the ensuing epidemic of AIDS, which begins shortly after Gerald Ford's public insurance, were merely a viral variation of the swine flu vaccine. And what if the perpetrators of the Great Swine Flu Massacre, President Gerald Ford, that is, as the logical person to blame for the catastrophe? Ford had to endure a torrent of public criticism, which quite naturally resulted in his defeat for election. He had previously been appointed when the agents of the International Drug Operation had ushered in Richard Nixon out of the office. The unknown Jimmy Carter, familiar only to the super secret federal members of the Trilateral Commission, was swept into office by the outpouring of rage against Gerald Ford. Carter proved to be almost as serious a national disaster as the swine flu epidemic, while Gerald Ford was retired from politics to life. Not only did he lose the election, he was also sentenced to spend his remaining years and trudging wearily up down in the hot sandy stretch of the Palm Springs golf course. Oh boy. At the annual ACS Science Writer Seminar, Dr. Robert W. Simpson at Rutgers University warned that immunization programs against flu, measles, mumps, and polio may actually be seeding humans with RNA to form proviruses, which will then become latent cells throughout the body. They can then become activated as a variety of diseases, including lupus, cancer, rheumatism, and arthritis. This is a remarkable verification of the early warning deliverance by Dr. Herbert Snow of London more than 50 years earlier. He had observed that the long-term effects of the vaccine lodging in the heart of other parts of the body would eventually result in fatal damage to the heart. The vaccine known a time bomb in the system, festering as what are known as the slow viruses, which may take 10 to 30 years to become viral. When that time takes place, the victim is felled by a fatal onslaught, often with no prior warning, whether it's a heart attack or some other disease. Health Freedom News, in its July-August 1986 issue, noted that the vaccine is linked to brain damage. 150 lawsuits pending against DPT vaccine manufacturers seeking $1.5 billion damages. When the present writer was a teenager in Virginia, each summer became a nightmare for anxious parents as epidemics of polymyositis, generally called infantile paralysis, swept the nation. Throughout the summer, we invited bottle after bottle of ice cold solo pop to wash down our afternoon snacks of candy bars, with no inkling that we were preparing our system for the bleeding of the polio virus. The most famous victim of polio was the governor of New York, Franklin D. Roosevelt. In 1931, during the annual polio epidemic, Roosevelt officially endorsed a so-called immune serum, a precursor of the polio vaccine in the 1950s. It was sponsored by Dr. Lindsay R. Williams, the son-in-law of the managing partner of the investment bankers Kittley Peabody. The Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations had urged the building of a new medical edifice to be called the New York Academy of Medicine. As was often the case, They did not provide their own funds. Remember that, folks. They never bring their money. They don't bring their wallets to this, folks. They never do. But planned a staging campaign whereby the public was induced to contribute millions of dollars for it. Dr. Williams was then appointed director of this academy, despite the fact that his medical abilities were a joke in New York. Williams used this post to become the apostle of socialized medicine in the United States, a goal which the Rockefeller medical monopoly ardently desired and which was finally achieved when the Medicare program was adopted many years later. In reality, as Dr. Emanuel Josephson pointed out, Williams stood for the political and commercial domination of the medical profession under a socialized system. Roosevelt then announced his candidacy for the presidency of the United States, a post which he seemed physically disqualified. Because of his handicap, he had been unable to stand or walk for many years. He conducted his business from a wheelchair. It seemed incredible that he would be able to wage a national campaign for the office of president. To allay these doubts, Dr. Williams wrote an article which was published in a Collier's magazine, the second largest magazine in the United States at that time. In this article, Dr. Williams certified that Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt was physically and mentally fit to be president of the United States. He was then brooded about a new cabinet post, that is, Secretary of Health, to be created especially for Dr. Williams. Wow, my goodness. And an upcoming Roosevelt administration. You can't make it up, folks. It's unbelievable. So Dr. Williams certified that Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt was a physical and mentally fit. And next thing you know, they create a Secretary of Health. And guess who is the chairman? Who's in the chairman of the cabinet? Dr. Williams himself. Wow. The immune system against polio was known to be dangerous and worthless when Roosevelt endorsed it. The National Health Institute of the U.S. Public Health Service had experimented with monkeys for 3 years using this identical serum. The Institute stated that a study of the serum had been made on the recommendation of Dr. Simon Flexner. Remember him, the head of the Institute. The serum was then used and many children died from it. New York State Commissioner of Health, Dr. Thomas Perrin, who was later appointed Surgeon General of the United States, who owed his appointment to Dr. Williams' recommendation to Governor Roosevelt, refused to hold hearings to validate the serum. While Roosevelt continued to reap the rewards of charity from his Warm Springs Foundation and his annual birthday ball celebrating the polio epidemic. In 1948, a Dr. Sandler, who was then serving as nutritional expert at the U.S. Veterans Administration Hospital in Otine, North Carolina, became alarmed at the enormous amount of heavily sugared drinks, candy, and other sweets which were being consumed by children during the hot summer months, at the same time that polio became epidemic each year. He conducted tests which led him to the conclusion that the children's consumption of sugar had a direct relation to the virus of the polio outbreaks. He then issued an urgent warning to parents to ban consumption of any refined sugar products, particularly candy, soft drinks, and ice cream during the summer months. The results of Dr. Sanders' campaign was that the number of polio cases dropped in North Carolina by 90% in a single year, from 2,498 people to only 229 in 1949 from 48. Aroused by the effect that Dr. Sanders' warning campaign had on their summer sales in North Carolina, the soft drink distributors and the candy manufacturers came in the following year with a statewide promotional campaign featuring free samples and other promotions. By 1950, the polio toll had risen once more to the 1948 level. What happened to Dr. Sandler? A study of North Carolina publications shows no further mention of him or his program. We have some sick people, folks. It's all that great God called it money. Herbert M. Shelton wrote in 1938 in his book, Exploitation of Human Suffering, that vaccine is pus, either septic or inert. If inert, it will not take. If septic, it produces infection. This explains why some children have to go back and receive a second inoculation, I should say, because the first one did not take. It was not sufficiently poisonous and did not affect the body. Shelton said that the inoculation causes sleeping sickness, infantile paralysis, and halomonophilus and tetanus. The Surgeon General of the United States, Leonard Shield, pointed out to annual AMA conventions in 1955 that no batch of vaccines can be proven safe before it is given to children. James R. Shannon of the National Institute of Health declared that the only safe vaccine is a vaccine that is never used. With the advent of Dr. Jonas Salk polio vaccine in 1950, American parents were assured that the problem had been solved and that their children were now safe. The ensuing suits against the drug manufacturers received little publicity. David versus Y Labs, a suit involving type 3 Sabin polio vaccine, was judged in favor of the plaintiff, David. A suit against Lever Labs involving Orimmune vaccine was settled in 1962 for $10,000. In two cases involving Parke Davis Quadrine, the product was found to be defective. In 1962, Parke Davis halted all production of Quadrine. The medical loaner, that is Dr. William Koch, declared that the injection of any serum, vaccine, or even penicillin has shown a very marked increase in the incidence of polio, at least by 400%. The Center for Disease Control stayed out of the sight for some time after the Great Swine Flu Massacre, only to emerge more strident than ever with its new national scare program and the dangers of another plague, which was named Legionnaire's disease. You remember that one, don't you? I do. After an outbreak at the Belvedere Stratford Hotel in Philadelphia. Apparently, this virus multiplied in the air conditioning and heating system of some older hospitals in large cities, probably because the vents were never cleaned. In a few isolated incidents, it caused death to those who were afflicted. For some reason, those victims were usually elderly legionnaires who had attended a gathering at one of these hotels as the older hotels were gradually replaced by new, more modern motels. Legionnaire disease quietly faded away without the Disease Control Center being able to bring off another $135 million coup for the Rockefeller medical monopoly. Polio vaccinations have been accepted as fact of life by the American people, which derives considerable comfort from the gradual disappearance of the annual scare campaign in the beginning of each summer. However, the Washington Post of January 26, 1988, featured a story which created some puzzling afterthoughts. It was announced at a national conference held in Washington that all cases of polio since 1979 had been caused by polio vaccine. We quote, in fact, all the cases in America come from the vaccine. The national occurring or wild-type polio virus has been shown to cause a single case of polio in the United States since 1979. It was to confront this unpleasant fact that the Institute of Medicine, under contract to the U.S. Public Health Service, had convened a committee in Washington to review the current use of polio vaccine. You thought they would vote to discontinue it, perhaps. You see, this would be a logical conclusion. Unfortunately, logic plays no part in such deliberation. The Post reported that no radical change is expected. The status quo is very appealing. And conference chairman Dr. Frederick Robbins of Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. This story raises more questions than it answers. It also reveals a wide gap between the medical mind and that of the layman. And the layman would say if all cases of polio in the United States since 1979 have been caused by the polio vaccine, isn't this a good reason for discontinuing? Such reasoning is always called simplistic by our overeducated professionals. After all, one has to think of the national economy and of drug manufacturers geared up to the continuous production of a vaccine for an epidemic which has disappeared. Think of the unemployment and the dividends to the holders of stock in the drug trust. After all, most of their income is donated to charity. If you cannot see the logic of this reasoning, you will never get a job at the U.S. Public Health Service, you see. So that's my conclusion of Chapter 4, talking about vaccines, vaccinations, I should say, or immunizations, by Eustace Mullins. I hope that you, this is older material, but it's still clear, you see, because he did research, deeper research than most people do. And he was able to get into the Library of Congress until they actually thrown him out. But he wrote almost all this information from books that basically maybe only one or two copies ever actually were around. Think about that, folks. Most of the books probably were either burned or either sold or just thrown out. I shouldn't say burned, but actually thrown out, so to speak. So this is the idea, Murder by Injection by Chapter 4, Eustace Mullins. Again, I appreciate you being here. This has been going on for a long time. This has been going on since the 1700s. We've gotten so smart about certain things that many people take these vaccines. And the next thing you know, people are dying. And it doesn't make any sense why they say we have to build your immune system. That's what they always say. Well, you have to take the shot in order to such and such to build your immune system. Well, excuse me, but your immune system is already in good shape as long as you take aware of the lymphatic system, which Dr. Robert Morris has proven. You take care of that, but they don't teach doctors anything about the lymphatic system. In fact, most of them don't know anything about it. If you didn't have a lymphatic system, folks, we'd all be dead. Seriously. Because this is actually where it takes the poisons out, wherever it's at, and stores it in your lymph nodes. That's what the lymphatic system is. It's a short word for lymph nodes, where it's usually under your arms, you see, or other places, and it's stored. Dr. Robert Morris talks about that, folks. You know, trying to help people to see this. If you feel like this is important, you need to share it. Because what I'm doing, folks, is nobody's doing this. They're not reading from a book. They're not sharing you from the past that is the truth that has been true. And Mr. Mullins is dead. He passed away in 2010. And so there's no one who's actually peddling his books hardly anymore. And that's not the point of making money. That's not it. It's the importance of telling the truth to the public. So if you feel like this is important, you need to pass it on to others. Okay? And again, thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you all, and your words of encouragement also. So you have a good night. You take care. We'll be on another day in the near future.